Hey heroes, welcome to another spine-tingling episode of History of the Marvel Universe. This channel is sponsored in part by Patreon supporters. If you would like to vote in monthly polls that help decide what topics get covered on the channel, then you can sign up for $1 per month over at patreon.com/MaryMarvelite. The link is in the description below along with other places you can find me. Several times on the channel we've spotlighted strange stories from before the Marvel Age of Heroes, many of which were originally published in anthology series in the 1950s. In the 1970s, a number of tales such as these were reprinted in a series of books that collected a variety of older stories from different magazines. One book to do this was a horror-themed anthology originally called Beware that changed its title to Tomb of Darkness starting with issue 9. Since it's the Halloween season, we're going to have a look at just a few of the stories that were shown in that particular book. The first tale in the first issue of Beware is called The Werewolf Was Afraid and was originally published in Menace number 8. This story features a British hunter by the name of Eric Lanson who bragged that he never killed an animal without provoking it to attack first. However, Lanson sought a more dangerous prey and traveled to Austria to hunt werewolves. But as he approached his target deep in the Black Woods, he was abandoned by his local guides. He continued through the forest alone and soon beheld a very peculiar sight. A real-life werewolf sitting atop a rock enjoying the scent of flowers and reading from a book of poetry. The hunter tried to goad the creature into attacking, but the werewolf, fully cognizant and fluent in English, seemingly had no interest in him or his poor manners. Lanson began to grow frustrated, calling the wolf a coward, but his jabs and insults had no effect on the calm creature. The hunter soon worked himself into a hot-blooded frenzy, declaring that he would kill the wolf man regardless. In that moment, the werewolf struck, quickly closing the gap and breaking Lanson's gun before he could fire a silver round. The wolf lunged again, and in an instant, Eric Lanson became the monster's next meal. Wiping his mouth with his victim's shirt, the wolf returned to his book, remarking that while he certainly could have killed the hunter in cold blood, Englishmen always tasted better once they heated themselves up. The next story was originally printed in Spellbound number 16 and is called Too Human to Live. This tale begins at a place called Vorlon Factory, where Sam Brinkler worked long shifts alongside tireless robots. Even his manager, Marshall Steele, was a mechanical being who refused to free him from the work contract he'd signed. One evening after work, Sam met a human woman named Mary Jones. She agreed to join him for a date the following evening, and Sam decided to buy out his contract. However, Steele would not accept this and even assigned Sam more hours, hoping that less contact with the outside world would help him adjust. That night, Sam attempted to escape, but his robotic co-workers were hot on his heels. Ultimately, as his head began to ache, Sam Brinkler fell from a high window and smashed into pieces. The other robots lamented that because he had been built to closely resemble a human being, Sam mistakenly believed that he actually was one. Our next story was originally printed in Adventures in Weird Worlds number 14 and is called The Man Who Walked on Water. This story begins off the coast of Cape Cod with a fisherman named Joe Russo, presumably unrelated to the film director of the same name. One day Joe beheld a very strange sight, a disheveled old man walking across the surface of the water. He didn't believe it at first, but on On closer inspection, it indeed seemed like the stranger was able to stand on water as if he were on solid land. Russo asked how such a thing could be possible, but the strange man refused to reveal his secret, claiming it was too dangerous. However, Joe left him with little choice when he threatened him with a gun, and the old man acquiesced. At the stranger's instructions, Joe Russo held his breath and followed down to the seafloor. The two men then performed a ritual in which Joe rubbed coral on his feet, seaweed all over his body and up his nose, and then the strange man made a prayer to the ocean god Neptune. Miraculously, the spell worked, and when the two men surfaced, Joe Russo was also able to walk upon the water. However, when he tried to walk onto the land, he sank as if the ground beneath his feet was liquid. Next up, from Mystery Tales number 25, is Mirror, Mirror on the Wall. This story begins with a criminal named Dan Malley in the midst of a late-night robbery at a pawn shop. Holding the owner at gunpoint, he demanded to know what the most valuable item in the store was. The pawnbroker, an old man named Winters, claimed that it was a mirror that had been coated in a layer of black paint that had the ability to bring the dead back to life. Malley didn't believe him, of course, and struck Winters on the back of the head. And while Malley hadn't intended on killing him, the old man's skull struck hard against a sharp metal andiron as he fell. With the pawnbroker dead, Malley took his key, emptied the cash register, and locked the door behind him as he left. However, as he walked away, he couldn't help but wonder about the black mirror. Even if what Winters said about raising the dead wasn't true, perhaps there was something of value hidden under the paint. He returned to the shop using the key to open the door, but the old man's body was missing. Perplexed but determined, he grabbed a paint scraper from the store and began chipping away at the blackness covering the mirror. But beneath the paint, it looked less like a mirror and more like a window into some shadowy moonlit area. Standing there on the other side was Winters, who walked closer and closer until his hands were pressed up against the glass. The next thing Dan Malley knew, he felt himself being pulled forward into the mirror. A moment later, it was Winters who was back in the pawn shop while his murderer was trapped within the mirror. While Malley ineffectively banged against the glass, Winters smiled as he slowly coated it in a thick layer of black paint once again. Our next story is called The Lonely Man and was originally printed in Marvel Tales number 126. This one stars Norton Dunlap, a strange, disheveled old man wearing black, thick-rimmed sunglasses. He roamed the streets begging passers-by to be his friend, but was met with hostility and rejection. Eventually, he wandered into a graveyard and collapsed, sobbing that he may as well be dead too. However, his cries drew the attention of the friendly night watchman who introduced himself. The kindly man brought Norton back to his shack, giving him coffee and company. But if one were standing outside the small structure, they would have then heard a terrified scream cry out from within. Shortly afterwards, Norton Dunlap departed, lamenting some bad habit that left him alone once more. He returned to his begging for friendship and was eventually noticed by a psychiatrist named Dr. Konda. The doctor took an interest in the strange man and offered to provide him with food, clothes, and spending money. In exchange, all Norton had to do was allow himself to be evaluated, which he would have done solely for the companionship. Konda learned that Norton could not keep friends for long due to some bad habit that he refused to elaborate on. Using hypnosis to test him, the doctor determined that the strange man didn't seem to be violent or dangerous. He He also broached the subject of the man's parents, and eventually Norton shared a picture of his father. Conde was shocked to see a photograph of a mythical one-eyed Cyclops. Norton revealed that he was one as well, although his eye was small enough to hide behind his black glasses. But that would be the last thing Dr. Conde ever witnessed, as the unfiltered gaze of a Cyclops was deadly. And so Norton Dunlap wandered back onto the street, once again lamenting his bad habit of removing his glasses. Our next tale comes from Mystic number 2 and is titled The Black Dungeon. This story begins with a small German village where a young woman named Helga witnessed a group of boys tormenting an innocent vagrant. She chased the miscreants off and saw that the thankful victim, a man named Otto, was disfigured and missing an eye. Otto excused himself and prepared to be on his way, but Helga decided to offer him a room to stay in. In exchange, Otto helped her with daily tasks, and not only was she always kind to him, but since her family was a respected one, the other townsfolk became more accepting of Otto as well. By all accounts, Helga was a kind and compassionate woman, but there was one man in the village that she did not care for. The wealthy tailor Conrad Gruber, who attempted to win her affection with a new dress. She, however, refused his gift, sensing some hidden malice behind his dark eyes. Despite this and Helga's pleas, her father promised Gruber that he would be allowed to marry her. Distraught, she confided in Otto, who promised that he would do whatever he could to help her. That night, through her window, she noticed Otto leading the tailor away while carrying shovels. Wishing to stop her friend from doing something foolish, she followed the two men all the way to the cemetery. Otto claimed that there were jewels hidden in the Gruber family mausoleum, and as Conrad started digging, Otto prepared to strike. However, the tailor expected something like this and quickly turned on the smaller man, badly beating him with the shovel. Leaving him for dead, Conrad Gruber spotted Helga as he left, grabbing her and locking the door behind him. Pulling her away, the two could hear Otto yelling from within the sealed crypt that he would always protect Helga. Meanwhile, Gruber told her that her father agreed to their marriage because he owed the tailor money. Furthermore, if Helga told anyone what happened, Gruber would claim that she and her father had sent Otto to kill him to escape that debt. And so a conflicted Helga agreed to marry Conrad to protect her father, and traveled with him to the United States. It was only once they were there that Gruber admitted that there was no debt, and that he only married Helga because she seemed unobtainable. While living with her new husband, Helga was not allowed to leave the house or even have any visitors. One day, while exploring the large empty property, she found a damaged mannequin that reminded her of Otto. In order to stave off madness in her isolation, Helga dressed the dummy up and spoke to it as if it were her beloved friend. That helped raise her spirits, but upon seeing his wife happy, Conrad accused her of sneaking out and seeing other men. He grew more violent, and Helga had nobody to confide in but the mannequin Otto. The following day, Conrad found her there in the storeroom with the dummy. Like a madman, Conrad Gruber wrapped his fingers around his wife's throat, accusing her of making a fool of him. Desperate, Helga instinctively called out to Otto for help, and then something amazing happened. The mannequin began to move and saved Helga's life by strangling her husband until he was dead. After the deed was done, the dummy also fell lifeless as if it had never been alive in the first place. When the police inevitably investigated, they determined that Conrad's death was the work of some home invader and were concerned about Helga's safety now that she was alone. Helga, however, was unafraid, for as long as she had Otto to protect her, she would never be alone again. Now, not every story from Beware is particularly scary. This is the case for the last tale that was reprinted before the book's title was changed to Tomb of Darkness. Originally from Astonishing number 56, this story is called They Walk Through Walls. And in this tale, a man named Clayton headed a subversive organization that plotted to overthrow the US government. You know, that old hat. In this case, his scheming was interrupted when two men literally walked through a wall to apprehend him. Those two introduced themselves as Masters and Abbott, and explained that they were part of a group of guardians who'd sworn to use their powers to defend mankind. They intended on bringing Clayton back to their headquarters and imprisoning him there, but the would-be dictator realized that his non-violent captors did not carry weapons and slipped away. Far from civilization, he ran for several days before he reached a road and was rescued by a random civilian. He was brought to a hospital where he insisted that Masters and his ilk were the ones plotting against the government. With such a fantastical story, a psychiatrist was brought in to examine Clayton. The doctor told his patient that he believed his story and would see to it that proper action would be taken. However, he then informed the doctor in charge of the hospital that Clayton was hopelessly mad and would need to be confined for the foreseeable future. With his job done, the psychiatrist departed, walking through the walls of the hospital while nobody was looking, to return to the Guardian's headquarters. Another strange story from Adventures into Weird Worlds number 6 is called The Wooden Man. This story features a ventriloquist, appropriately named Ventro, and his ghoulish-looking dummy, Kevin. One day, a woman named Laura took notice of the act and found herself drawn to the ventriloquist. After the show, Laura went backstage to meet Ventro, and their interactions were somewhat strange. While the dummy insisted that Ventro return her advances, the ventriloquist himself seemed to want to keep his distance. Still, a relationship formed, and as time rolled on, Laura followed Ventro and Kevin, watching their act every time it was performed. Ventro did go out to dinner with her, but the peculiar puppet never left his side. Despite all this strangeness, Laura eventually declared that she wanted Ventro to marry her. The ventriloquist ran off, demanding that she leave him, while Kevin pleaded with him to go back. Laura, still strangely obsessed, suspected that Ventro was communicating his true feelings through the dummy and gave chase. She wrapped her arms around the handsome man, but as she did, felt something crack, like a mechanism breaking inside of him. She realized the truth a moment later when Ventro collapsed, and Kevin, still standing, confessed that he was the real ventriloquist, and that he was in love with her. Laura then let out a scream before running away, not looking back at the strange little creature or his wooden man. Next, originally printed in Marvel Tales number 96, is The Witch's Son. This story begins in the year 1627 in a Hungarian town called Szegény, where famine and pestilence plagued the land and people. The superstitious villagers blamed their misfortune on witchcraft and intended on executing an old woman named Marja. However, a young boy named Bella knew that Marja was a good person who had helped her community and sought to save her. Releasing a cage of captive bears to cause a disturbance, Bella rescued the old woman from her fiery fate. A grateful Marja promised Bella that in return for this, her son would always watch over and protect him. The only stipulation was that Bella would have to promise never to look at his protector's face. Bella agreed, not believing Marja even really had a son, and returned to the village. As he did, the other villagers surrounded him and threatened to burn him at the stake for what he'd done. But the very next moment, a cloaked horseman atop a pitch-black steed arrived to drive the would-be attackers away. And as the years passed, whenever Bella's life was endangered, the mysterious rider would appear. Even a simple bully was enough to summon his savior, preventing any harm from coming to Bella. And when he became a man and was sent to war, the cloaked protector continued to save him. When Bella finally returned to Sigane, he married a woman named Zelda, who he'd known since childhood. Initially, he did not tell her the story of his mysterious guardian, but the couple was eventually saved by him when their home caught fire. Zelda was curious about her husband's protector and devised a plan to learn his identity, later falling from a second-story window. When the mysterious rider caught her, Zelda pulled off his large-brimmed hat, only to find nothing underneath. Once revealed, the protector's clothes collapsed as if they were never worn. Mere minutes later, the couple heard the news that Merja had passed away from old age at 100 years old. Listening to the town crier, Bella realized that the old woman fell lifeless, seemingly at the exact same time as the witch's son. Our final story for this week is The Man in the Tomb, originally from Mystic number 12. This tale seemingly begins with a grisly scene of several masked men preparing to execute another on a chopping block. In truth, the axe they wielded was a phony, and the whole scene was an initiation ceremony into a club called the Knights of Mystery. However, these knights then came face to face with real danger when their lodge was visited by an armed mobster named Muggs Venetti. While his racketeering made him money, Venetti's girlfriend wanted him to gain social status by joining the prestigious club. The other knights were reluctant, but with the threat of violence, agreed to let him undergo one of their initiation ceremonies. This one would be held at a deserted cemetery, which the men traveled to together. There, they revealed that Venetti's test would be to spend the night locked in a graveyard tomb. A key would be hung outside of the door, and at any point Venetti could reach out of a hole and grab it, but of course the test would be to resist that for as long as possible. The mobster was locked inside, but the other men were wary of actually letting such a dangerous man in their club. Soon after being left alone, Venetti decided he would simply let himself out and lie about spending the night there. However, he fumbled while trying to grab the key and dropped it on the ground outside, out of reach. Trapped in the dark, Venetti began to scream, but with the graveyard abandoned, there was no one around to hear him until the other men returned. Meanwhile, the Knights of Mystery decided that rather than inducting the mobster, they would change the location of their meeting place and agreed never to return to that tomb of darkness. And that's all I've got for you this week, folks. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it on your favorite social media. Maybe we'll do another one of these next October. In the meantime, the issues referenced in this video are listed in the description below if you would like to read them for yourself, as well as links to other places you can find me, including my Patreon page, where for only $1 a month you can get your name in these special thanks here, and vote in monthly polls that help decide what topics get covered on the channel. But thank you guys so much for watching this video, and until next time, true believers, Excelsior!